Hello, my name is Dean Kartover, and this is The Current Buzz. Today we have Ursula Long. She's an author. She's going to talk about her book, Amber Wolf, and she's going to explain a little history about it and a summary of the book. I read the book. I think it was excellent. It was riveting as far as I'm concerned, and I think everyone should buy it. So, Amber Wolf, Ursula, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Let's talk about the history of Lithuania, because it takes place in Lithuania. It could happen today. I mean, this could be contemporary. Not to say it will be, but it could be.
Lithuania, unfortunately, along with the other Baltic countries, has a history of occupation. So going back in time, they were under the control of the Tsar for the longest period. And then World War I came, and after that war, there was a period of independence. So Lithuania and the other Baltics, Poland as well, had a period where...
We're talking about, excuse me, the other Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia,
yeah.
and Lithuania are basically in the same umbrella. Small nations, 2 or 3 million people each in each country.
Roughly, and Lithuania, for example, is the size of West Virginia.
Oh, okay.
But after World War I, there was a period of independence, and Lithuania in particular tried to set up a government. But it's hard when you don't have that history behind you, and World War II began with the rumblings from Hitler, and he and Stalin in 1939 made a non-aggression pact, which Hitler obviously ignored almost immediately. But as part of that non-aggression pact, they divided up the Baltic countries so that Stalin occupied them. And before World War II actually broke out, Stalin invaded the Baltics. He invaded Lithuania and Estonia
So when
and
it
Latvia.
was 1940, the war kind of started September 1st, 1939, when
Yep.
they
Stalin was
invaded
already
Poland.
in Eastern Europe.
Okay.
And then Hitler started marching toward Moscow, and he swept through Eastern Europe, and in 1941 drove the Soviets out. And just before the Soviets left, they organized massive deportations in Lithuania, and they targeted the intellectual elite. They targeted professors and teachers and government doctors, and some of them were sent to Stutthof, and some of them were sent to Siberia.
Where's Stutthof?
Stutthof is a concentration camp in the area, yeah. And the Germans came through, and Stalin fled. So the Germans occupied Lithuania for several years until 1944, when Hitler was already bringing his troops back toward Germany after the horrible incident, the horrible fighting in Stalingrad and so forth. So Hitler was already receding. He'd left Eastern Europe, and Stalin's Red Army came back in 1944. And that was the occupation that was to last until the 1990s. So Amber Wolf is about that second occupation by Russia during World War II in 1944, and specifically the summer, August of 1944.
Right.
And it was a tough time for the country because they really didn't know their political alliance, because they didn't want to go with the Nazis. They hated Stalin and the idea of communism, and they were really caught in the middle. So some of the Lithuanians, especially farmers, it was very much an agrarian population at that time. So the farmers stole guns from the Soviets, and they went into the woods, the familiarity of these grand primeval forests in Lithuania where they hid. And they popped out.
I like that term.
Yeah, they popped out from time to time to do damage to the Soviets, and that is what Amber Wolf is about. It's really the heart and the heart throb of that patriotic and partisan effort to rid the country of the Soviet influence.
Would you call this a historical novel?
Very much historical fiction. Now, the characters are made up, but I spent 2 years researching not only the history, but the culture, adding to my knowledge, because I grew up in a Lithuanian household until my grandparents died.
Right.
And so I researched history, culture, a little bit of the language, and very much the attitude of the people. And the result is Amber Wolf.
Right. I remember the beginning of the attack on the mother of your sort of star in the book. I don't know what the term is, a heroine of the book, and her name was Ludmila.
Ludmila.
Okay, and she heard the attack by the Russian soldiers on her mother, and that was very moving, and then it went on from there. And you want to talk a little about that?
Sure. Ludmila Kudirka is
she's 21 years old, right?
Yep, early 20s, and she was at university for a period of time until they were closed by the Nazis. So she and her mother fled their home in Kaunas after her father was deported. He was deported in 1940.
Now, her father was a college professor, if I remember
History
correctly.
professor, that's
History
right.
professor,
Yeah.
okay.
So he was among that elite that was deported.
And they were hoping he would come home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Amber 2, the new book, the sequel, which is not out yet, talks more about what happened to Ludmila's father. But nonetheless, in 1941, when he was deported, was the time that the German army was about to occupy Lithuania. So Ludmila and her mother fled. Her brother went to fight the Nazis because they didn't want the Soviets back. And as I said before, these people were in a terrible predicament. They didn't want either choice, and they were so small that their ambition for self-determination was almost impossible because they were between two massive armies.
No doubt.
But Ludmila and her mother fled to the country, and her mother had the idea that they could hide. But of course, the Russians found them in 1944 when the Red Army came back with a vengeance. And soldiers came into the little cottage, and Ludmila's mother had a few minutes before they burst into the door, and she helped her daughter hide in the attic. So Ludmila heard what the soldiers did to her mother. And after that, Ludmila had to decide how she was going to survive. And she knew that the Russians were looking for her. She knew that they knew she existed, and they wanted her, and they wanted to either deport her or kill her or whatever. So she fled to the woods because her father had the fortitude to know that her future might be there, might be the place where she would be safe from a potentially invading army. So she went to the woods and she hooked up with partisans there, again, who are essentially farmers. And the story is about their attitude and how they attack, and Ludmila's coming of age. She didn't know that she could survive until she really had to.
But if I remember in the book, her father used to take her out in the woods and teach her the ways of hunting and that type of thing, and shooting.
He did, and as not only as a history professor who was very aware of Lithuania being kind of a doormat for other countries on their effort to get to the Baltic, but he also represented the culture as a whole, because the woods are an important part of the Lithuanian culture. Stories exist about wood nymphs and baubas, who are creatures that live in the wood and grab lost children and eat them. So all of
that
this
is in the book also.
It's in the book, and all of this legend and history is something that Ludmila's father was intimately aware of, and he wanted to make sure his children knew how to survive in the city and in the woods. So he, yes, pointedly made sure that Ludmila could shoot and could survive and could track and could make a life for herself if she had to.
In the cold winter also.
In the cold winter.
I mean, let's not forget, it gets cold in Lithuania.
It does. And partisans, in fact, into the late 1940s and into the 50s, were building bunkers. And these were actually underground rooms fortified with wood where they could live in the winter, hidden from casual
Well, I mean, I think all of Northern Europe, all of the Eastern countries, when I was in Northern Europe, in Sweden, they would always tell me the enemy will come from the east. And the only enemy that I know that's from the east is basically the Russians. And that's what the mindset is. And when you're a small country, you have to protect your citizens, and you have to prepare bunkers and hide food and hide ammunition, hide all types of weapons and trucks and vehicles in these big mountains, and they dig out, to protect their society.
The bunkers and the type of things that the Lithuanian partisans were able to steal and create, they built their own bunkers, were relatively small. It was a small people, and the partisans were tens of thousands at their heyday, and they were ultimately decimated by the Red Army. But their initial thrust in the mid-1940s was really an expression of the heart of the country for its desire for just the right of self-determination. So these partisans expressed it, and many of them died, and it's a David and Goliath struggle. I mean, at the most, tens of thousands against Stalin's million-man army, and it was an impossible battle. But the partisans fought as best as they could, and they were supported by people who couldn't fight. So villagers gave them food, and they, tried to do whatever they could. And in turn, the partisans helped people on the farms and in the villages by protecting them when they could, because Stalin's troops went into, under the guise of communism and redistributing the wealth, many of these soldiers went in and just took whatever they could. And the families fled to the woods.
It's called pillaging.
Pillaging, yes. And Stalin really gave a nod to that. And so these families fled, and they fled to the woods, or they fled to other cities,
or other states.
Because
you had the Baltic Sea there,
Exactly. It was hard to cross the Baltic Sea, but many of them were part of the displaced, the DP mass, this mass of people who were wandering aimlessly through Europe without homes after the war ended. And so Lithuanians were very much part of that. But the ones who stayed in the country, fought the Soviets as best as they possibly could.
Now, why you should look at Amber Wolf, and here it is. Why you should read it, because it may happen today, and they may be getting ready for any possible attack from the east. I don't want to say specifically who, but I'm sure they're getting things squared away.
As soon as Lithuania got their freedom in 1990, they declared their freedom in 1990. Of course, that was around the time, it's just before the time of the breakup. One thing that Lithuania did was to join NATO. And
that's correct, to protect themselves.
Exactly, to get the support of the East. And they have a military, they have a level of weaponry, but it's still a David and Goliath scenario. And I think that they will sting as much as they can if there is an aggression. But again, what can a small country do against a very large one?
Yeah, I read recently where the United States put a battalion in Lithuania. They also put a battalion in Latvia and an American battalion in Estonia. So they would have at least a battalion, which a battalion, reinforced battalion is probably 800 men and women. So that's what they have right now. And we also put a brigade into Poland. A brigade is about 3,500 men. In case people who are watching this show understand what's going on today, right as we speak, this is happening.
Sometimes even the symbolism of a threat is sufficient to quell an enemy.
Right. I lived in a small country, and they're very, very protective of secrets and of themselves.
Yeah.
They're very concerned. They're always concerned. They have this little, we're a small country, and you come from a large country. There is that mentality.
Very much so. And the Soviets were everywhere during the war and into the 40s and 50s and so forth. And I think Lithuania very much developed a culture of silence. It was hard to be trusted if you were an outsider, and these people really kept to themselves about what they knew, because they could be damaging friends and family if they spoke out of turn. And I think this is to a degree prevalent in Lithuanians today, because it, it's not to say that this isn't a warm and loving group of people. They are very family oriented and very wedded to their culture, very proud of their culture.
Right.
But there is a bit of a culture of silence, not unlike the Irish in South Boston, right? So there's certain things you just don't talk about.
The language is Lithuanian, but the book is in English. Are you going to try to get that translated into Lithuanian? Is that
Possibly. I really wrote it for non-Lithuanians.
Oh, okay.
This is a corner of history that I don't think many people think much about or are even aware of what it was like
That's true.
during the first days of the Soviet occupation. So I think it's informative to non-Lithuanians, and really that was my audience, to try to bring light.
I was drawn into the book. I mean, I could see myself being a partisan for some reason. I was drawn into it. Maybe because of my military background, I could see myself there in doing some of those things, against what's happening in occupying force. No one wants to be occupied. I don't care who you are. No one wants to be occupied. And that's a reality in life. And we have to realize that, especially if you're a small country and a larger country comes in. Even the Japanese occupied Vietnam, and they didn't like them being.
Yeah.
They didn't want to be occupied. So we have to think of that.
Absolutely, I thought about that in the book too. These partisans were really fighting for this tiny piece of dirt, and I mean, in a certain sense, it's crazy. I mean, why fight for some dirt? What does it matter? But it was their dirt, and they were willing to sacrifice their lives for it.
Right.
And I think it's something that we can identify with. I mean, obviously our own revolution and so forth, we weren't part of that, but that mentality of freedom is in us.
I think it's in everyone.
I think it's in everyone, yeah.
I think it's in everyone. What you said you were going to have sequels. What's the sequels? I mean, let's talk about that.
Okay, so I'm working on the sequel to Amber Wolf, and this is, the book will be called The Red Widow.
Okay.
The Red Widow. And it goes into the late 40s and 50s, 60s and 70s, 80s and 90s. So it brings us to the period of Lithuanian independence from the Soviet Union. But what happened in the late 1940s was that a Soviet officer was able to infiltrate one of the partisan camps. And he was actually very successful in giving information to the Soviets about what was going on in the guerrilla-type warfare of the partisans. So The Red Widow fictionalizes that account of history, and it goes into how a Soviet could possibly get into a camp, what that experience was like for the partisans, and while this was going on, the Soviets actually offered amnesty to the partisans, and some of the partisans in the fictional account, The Red Widow, actually take that amnesty. So I try to go into what that must have been like for the people who decided to remain and fight, so that their comrades or their fellow soldiers, in one moment they're fighting together, and in the next moment one of them leaves. And what did it feel like for the partisans who chose to remain? What was that loss?
Well, in Amber Wolf, there was a gentleman who turned on the village, or the people in the village, or the farmers. Remember that? And they killed him.
Yeah, Petra. Yeah, so Petra was a farmhand, and he was an informant.
Right.
And everybody knew he was an informant, and actually the partisans played him. But again, it was very much a personal kind of thing to decide how to survive in this situation. As an individual, do you worry about yourself and side with the Soviets? Do you worry about the future and side with the partisans? I mean, what do you do?
Yeah.
And so it was very much a personal decision for all of the people involved.
It was very good. I mean, I was blown away by it. You're also going to come out the Amber War. You're going to come out with a book called The Amber War.
I think the Amber War has morphed into the Red Widow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Work in progress.
All right.
Poetic
That's
license.
Yeah. That's great. You recently visited Peru.
I did.
Right.
Yes. With
Tell
my
us
husband.
about that. I'm
Oh, my
interested in
goodness.
Peru. Did you go? What's that? what's the ruins, the Inca ruins in Peru?
Machu Picchu? Yes, we went there.
Oh, wow.
It's magnificent.
Did you hike up? Is that what happens?
We took a bus up, but when we were when we were at altitude, we hiked a short distance to the Sun Temple, so it's higher up in the mountain,
Okay.
where we had a tremendous view of Machu Picchu and the old ruins. And I actually wrote a story, a longer short story,
Right.
which is available on Amazon right now, and it's called "The Baby Who Fell from the Sky," and it talks about the spiritual beliefs of the Incan Indian.
Right.
And
Even today.
even today, how
Right.
there's a kind of duality in belief between the spirits of the mountains and the sun and
the
the
lake
earth.
and-
Yes, and how that coincides with their belief in Christianity. So, I mean, that's a little bit dull. The story is about a woman who finds a baby, and it's her decision to raise it, and he has magical properties, and she eventually realizes he has to leave home, and she has to resolve the fact that he was a gift for a period of time, and he needs to go out because he's special, and he needs to do good in the world.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of a modern fable,
Yeah.
but it came from many different strands of inspiration from
Oh.
Peru.
So tell me, I mean, what do you do? Fly into Lima and then
Yeah.
take a bus up to the mountains? Is that how it goes? I mean,
Yeah, oh God. We flew into Lima, we spent some time there, then we flew into the mountains. We went to Cusco, we flew to Cusco.
Okay.
Then we took ground transportation to various towns en route to Machu Picchu and Aguas Calientes. And from there we went up into the mountains. We spent a couple of days at Machu Picchu, and it is truly stupendous.
Yeah.
It's just glorious.
All right.
And then we went back to Cusco for a number of days.
That's on my checklist.
On your bucket
Yeah,
list.
my
checklist,
bucket list, yeah.
I would recommend it. It's
Yeah.
a wonderful place.
Right. And very spiritual.
I think so. I think so. Yes.
What's the elevation? 10,000 feet plus? Or?
I think it's a little bit lower than that,
Oh,
but I think
okay.
that's the ballpark. And oddly enough, the natives chew cocoa leaves
Still today.
in order to deal with the altitude.
High
It
altitude,
helps,
no
yeah.
kidding. Wow.
Yeah, and some of the hotels have oxygen for the lowly tourists who go there and get out of breath.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to be really in good shape, more or
It
less.
helps. It truly helps.
It helps.
Yeah.
People from all over the world?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We were with a group, and they were mostly from the United States, but the group had traveled extensively all over the world.
Oh,
and,
okay. So
it was a wonderful mix of
Yeah,
people.
yeah, that's great. And what spurred you to do this? I mean, what was?
Bucket list.
Yeah.
I had always wanted to go to Machu Picchu, and we just decided to do it.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Anything else? Any books coming? There was an article in the Lowell Sun about you on June 5th, 2016. I read that.
Oh my
that
goodness,
was
that was wonderful. Alana Mellinson from the
Yeah.
Lowell Sun, who was the Chelmsford, the reporter for Chelmsford for the
she's
Sun.
a Chelmsford resident now.
Yes,
I don't know
yes,
if you
she
know
is.
that.
Yes, she got a condo.
Yeah.
And so she came to the house with a videographer, and it's nothing for them, but I was just beside myself. They were filming me in my study, and it was a lot of fun. And so she asked me why I write, and
Yeah, why do you write?
I said that I think that everybody has stories inside them. You have many stories, I know that. And everybody has stories inside
They
them.
do. They do.
And they express them in different ways, be it through art or conversation or the written
They could
word.
come on this show and talk about their stories. I'm willing to listen to
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
I think stories are great.
I agree with you.
And there's some stories that they die with the people, and
I know.
and it's regrettable that we can't, historically put that in writing and hold it and keep it
in
somewhere.
writing or minimally videos, because it's